Oh.
Grace, can you hear us?
Maybe wait.
Oh, sorry. I just introduced you, didn't realize you were not hearing anything. Please go ahead. Go ahead. The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you so much. Can everyone see the screen?
Yes.
Yeah.
All right, fantastic. I didn't get to hear my intro, so some of it might be repetitive, but I'm so excited to be part of this afternoon and this exciting panel for Atypical Architectures. Big thanks to Athena, of course, since meeting at MIT and the faculty and staff at NYIT for having me today, particularly by Zoom. I'd really love to be there in person, but I am a mother to a 1 month newborn. So I hope everyone can understand that remote is quite ideal. I'm also having some challenges remodeling my rooms to be more baby accessible. So I think it's very fitting for this topic. But long story short, just wanted to maybe make sure we could get into some of the big topics today. But first, my visual description. I have long black hair, half tied and wearing a navy blue top and sweater. Again, I'm an associate professor at the University of Georgia and board of a nonprofit called Open Style Lab. Particularly my background is in graphic design, and over the last decade, it has intertwined with multiple disciplines, from user experience to what I'm teaching today in graphic design to integrating sensors for garments that works with people with disabilities. And so I think interdisciplinary work is something that I'm heavily invested in. And while most of my stuff has kind of overlaid with fashion and disability, I holistically really aim to see how design and technology facilitate the body when participating in desired activities. So I do this as a designer and as an educator. And recently I published a book by Bloomsbury, which I'll talk about a little bit later. But a big part of my focus, and hopefully something I could share that's aligned with today's topic, is really examining typical or normative, I think, bodies and what we think of what is a normative body, but more importantly, how we interact with our bodies within a given space, and especially for clothing, and also in the spaces that we exhibit, and how we could improve those experiences in the context of the built environment and in fashion, and what kind of agencies are we kind of challenging as we do this. So in this topic for health and design, I tend to look at three big areas that I'd love to discuss and share some of my work in. And it's around collaborations and relationships to aging and what it means to be having good social health, what it means to be having well-being, how do we age in place, what does that look like for how we interact with basic things such as clothing, as well as shelter and food. And disability is a larger spectrum. It's an umbrella term for me for a broader, diverse set of experiences. And I think from the past panel, you've already heard that there's such great intersectionality that you could have multiple disabilities and sometimes overlapping with aging. And finally, interdisciplinary co-design, or the affordances of why we collaborate in design. And so those three help us kind of, I think, dive into more questions and inquiries on like why inclusion and accessibility are important, but how do we actually practice it? And how does collaborative design actually bring about inclusion? How do you make relationships, maintain them, and then bring them into the design context? And how like creative approaches could really give us a bit more perspective on some pressing issues around health. So that with a bit of interdisciplinary practice, I'm kind of really working on how to facilitate co-design, translate observations in design, and kind of look at the human body interaction through dress. And one example of this was a previous work I did during the pandemic. That is a sketch. The image is a sketch of me with shorter hair, wearing a mask that I had designed with the group at NYU Langone, who were helping and of course assisting patients who were not able to be facilitated outside of the hospital, and many who have disabilities and were of the aging population. So I spent months through phone calls and Zooms to understand what some of those needs were for the hospital, and then to see how that could be translated into a mask for people who may not have a sewing machine or I think, access to even masks at that time. It was very early in March. And so this was printed in collaboration and highlight of that at the Washington Post. And among that, I wanted to kind of share, based on that example work, some of the contents that I'll be reviewing today. First, starting with how do we reimagine the body dialogue, like extensions of the body. For example, in aging, we see different types of products, whether it's walkers or canes or wheelchairs. In fashion, we see this in different types of garments that are adaptive or accessible, that may hold a catheter, or it's built to have extensions or pleats that help with greater range of mobility. And then how does that kind of really translate to the way we see different ways of the body and the space? And so these three aspects, the extensions of the body, the products that we place or use, and then of course what we wear, is the dialogue that I'm kind of examining and hoping to share. And in particular about clothing and materials, I think that it's like a long way to have a great discussion, and hopefully I can learn from also our great panelists about how materials are applied to the body. What does it mean when, we're looking at not just materials for the built space, but how do we fabricate new things? And so this is an example of a collaboration I did with the faculty at the Hong Kong Poly Institute of laser printing onto pleats, and to make it more dynamic and function for a rehabilitation center, where many of the patients there had requested on, like, is there a better way to like pull up my pants when I'm using the restroom? And so we thought about pleated designs, pleated fabrics, and pleated materials. And so materiality is a big component in my interdisciplinary practice. And it's not just fashion, but I think that plays a part to also the social cultural aspect of fashion. And luckily, there is so much that has preceded my scholarly work. And you can see this through some of the designers today, from Comme des Garçons, who've challenged about notions of the body. Here on the left is like a red garment by Comme des Garçons, looking at what it means to have a disfigured body, what it means to have a beautiful body, what that means in a social context. And then the actual materiality proportion in the middle image from Issei Miyake, on using pleats to be able to have a more accessible line. So there's only, I think, like 3 sizes for Issei Miyake in terms of length. And so the width part is already something that's been addressed through their innate design technique, which is still prevalent today. And then on the right, I was able to interview a few more new and upcoming designers, as well as companies that are starting to look and branch into interdisciplinary ways of dressing as products. And this is a garment designed by Samsung Hardest, so from the Samsung Corporation, on looking at workwear that is accessible for people with disabilities. And so this context of fashion is kind of related to my book. I hope if you haven't had a copy or a chance to look at it, it's on Amazon. It's called Fashion, Disability, and Co-Design. And in there, I had the great privilege of looking up a lot of great precedents about fashion history, disabled designers like Helen Cookman, who have already done collaborations with companies like Levi's and thought about different ways to challenge how we look at the body through trousers in this image. And also how we think in context of what that meant for fashion at that time. So in 1940s, when Helen Cookman was still up in the rise, a lot of the context was looking at the new design aspects that was provided from European influences and trends, and then from, of course, today's modern day of garments which are more adaptive for athleisure wear, as you see on the right from Zappos, which is part of Amazon's line. And so a lot of this context gives me an idea of how do we reframe what we wear on the body? How do we interact with the spaces that are close to our body? And again, these 2 images are different ways to look at how we place like a cell phone in the front pocket so it doesn't slip out onto the side, and how that works when we're actually moving in motion. So challenging how our bodies are not just static, but also moving, and how that also correlates to a lot of fashion history. So for example, on the right, there is Hermes for spring 1994. And so Hermes had already thought about these apron-like pockets that were placed in the front, which I see come up a lot in some of the designs today that are meant to be more inclusive of aging and disability. In Precedents to Architecture, I wanted to shout out to Hussein Chalayan and some of his work, this intersectionality between space and garments. This is an example where the garments actually turn into, or from furniture, turn into garments. And so it shows this kind of great, I think, play where design and creativity could kind of give us a different perspective on how we approach health and design in general. So I always wondered if this would actually be sold, and I hope something like this would come to light soon. But after some of that work, I wanted to kind of talk about and discuss that there's been also the social context. And I know in the previous talk discussion, you had mentioned a lot about, I think, is this accepted socially? Do people want to have accessible subtitles or different curb cuts, or can this be kind of designed in a different way that is socially accepted? And so there has been a long history, and I'd like to acknowledge that there has been a different perspective from the social and medical model, but also more importantly, that I think designers aren't just able-bodied, and that so the diversity from the actual agency of who's designing should be considered as well. And so that got me to the question of, there's access to ADA compliance to spaces, but why aren't there compliances or benefits for clothing? And especially when it's one of the most integral experiences for human living. And this has been predated, of course, through my scholarly research to many scholars before me, but really seeing from subtitles to movies, voice readers for phones, there are so many great inventions by disabled people and from aging people that I think we sometimes forget to kind of include in some of our research work, but it has definitely influenced a lot of mine. And I think the way we think about accessibility and inclusion to bring innovation. This had greatly inspired me to do a nonprofit. This is how I met Athena back at MIT. And Open Style Lab was a public service project before, I think I was about 10 years, yes, 10 years ago, and has since became a 501c3 nonprofit. I'm very privileged to have a very diverse board and team that we won the National Design Awards together for our work, and particularly looking at how education and research with people with disabilities can be something that brings greater awareness, but also pushes innovation and boundaries. So for example, we had a few programs that ran each summer. That was 10 weeks that brought in occupational therapists, physical therapists, with designers and engineers to collaborate together with either a disability group or a disability expert. Sometimes the designers were disabled. So I think there was a lot of intersectionality that happened for each of our summer programs. And of course, it also became a class while I was a professor at Parsons School of Design. And so that became an interdisciplinary class, similar to, I think, what was mentioned for the Ability Lab that I had heard. So multiple students from graduate level to undergraduate level from different backgrounds were able to take this course. I think for the lack of time, I'll skip the video, but I would definitely recommend if people could watch Design for All on Hulu. I wanted to stress the relationship aspect of this and to show this process and to really kind of honor that I think you have to design with and not design for, and that sometimes they have its challenges, but it also brings about unique, I think, ways to approach a different way of looking at things. And so an example, not from this video, but from my book and some of the many works from my students, is looking at how design can be translated from observation, working with different communities, working with people in various areas to action and design choices. And so this is an image of my friend Colleen, who is a photographer, and she's also a wonderful writer, but she is also disabled and she has cerebral palsy. But she had mentioned about her backpack not being able to hold as many things that was reachable, especially during times when it rained. And so the students had worked with Colleen to really examine what were the pieces in her like immediate pocketbook that they wanted to redesign. And so they thought about different ways of how materials could fold, how would it be placed onto Colleen's current electric wheelchair? how was the reach of the body or the interaction of the body going to be with the product that was made? And most importantly, how did they do this together? So they visited Colleen's home. They also commuted with her from New Jersey a few times to really understand how this impacts her daily living and activities, and then was able to collaborate to make a crossbody bag that was also fitted for a wheelchair on the sidearm. These were many of the examples that I had the privilege of teaching, but also experiencing as a faculty. And from those 8 years of doing these classes and collaborative work, I've learned there were 5 really big things that I think to consider when you're designing with a people with a broad definition of abilities. The first one is the level of activity or engagement of that body. The second is about the time or the duration. So is fatigue, a factor? In terms of time, for a commute, how does that work? For a product or a wearable garment to be able to endure or last. And then, of course, extensions, as I mentioned earlier, from prosthetics to wheelchairs to other types of assistive devices. And how does that amplify our body or augment our bodily experiences? The fourth is about the ease of experience. So is it easy to wear something that is going to be more accessible? Is the product easy to use? Is the space also easy to understand and to be able to experience? And so that ease of use and experience has been pretty prominent in a lot of the collaborative work I've seen. And finally, challenging the social and personal perception. And so especially in fashion, you can see sometimes uniforms being a sense of community or bringing a sense of community. Whereas you could also have your individualized fashion, and how does that boundary also help people define their bodies and themselves? And so this kind of really is the conclusion to that inclusion is just more than access, and like co-designing with various groups really helps us create more value for others, provides design that drives value for the self as well, and it increases compliancy for longer usage. So for example, if you design something together like Colleen's bag, she has still been using it. We did redesign it once. That it's actually being used for a longer time rather than being thrown out as we've seen in fast fashion. And it also reduces stigma by being inclusive in the process. Products and technologies that are not designed inclusively don't focus on the human experience, and I think becomes very need-based dominant. So it's only just about the needs. It doesn't really consider about someone's character, personality, and you see this a lot also in clothing or the ways we wear or choose to wear things and the personality that it brings. It also doesn't integrate, like I said, the social model of disabilities and becomes highly medicalized. So I'd love to say thank you and maybe just give it to the next speaker and would wait for the panel if anybody has questions, but appreciate everyone listening to me remotely today.
Thank you so much, Grace. It's wonderful to see how the work has been developed, back at MIT, and how successful Open Style Lab is and all the other work you're doing. So yes, please stay with us until the panel so you can have some questions from us.
Thank you.
So next, we're going to have Kyle Karen, and Kyle has a unique background that will be of interest to us because he has both kind of art background with studying at RISD and both occupational therapy training. So she's going to give her perspective on the intersection of art and occupational therapy.
Yeah, this computing.
Is there an issue?
There's no fix. My notes are in my.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's a good instruction. Sorry. The group looks at
I apologize for the delay.
Right. Focus. Yeah, I think it's very valuable. Just to move with each other, it makes it much more interesting. Pretty sure.
Thank you for hanging in here with me. Sorry for the delay. I know it's getting late. While I'm getting this going and give my visual description, I'm a middle-aged white woman. Doesn't matter what I'm wearing because you can't see me behind the podium anyway.
Yeah, it's good.
So, my name is Kyle Karen and oh, sorry, this one? Okay. This is better? Can you hear me? Okay, great. So my name is Kyle Karen. I'm really honored to be here today. Full disclosure, I'm not an architect. I'm an occupational therapist and an occupational scientist. I'm an assistant professor here at New York Tech. I have a PhD in OT, board certification in public health, and a BFA in painting from Rhode Island School of Design, which I earned in 1987. That was the last century. My unlikely career path may seem arbitrary, but at its confluence is the exciting combination of art, design, occupation, and health. That is why I'm here. For this presentation, I will speak about how the roots of occupational therapy, and therefore of occupational science, are entangled with architectural design for health, and what the implications that connection may have for current or future collaboration among the disciplines. This presentation includes a general overview of what occupational therapy is and traces the history of OT through its prehistory and founding, its transformation by the rise of the biomedical model, and the establishing of occupational science to unite and rebalance the profession by recentering occupation as the overarching therapeutic mechanism. I will explore several concepts from occupational science that have influenced OT practice and that may interest architects and designers. There are more concepts that fall into this category than I can describe today, but I hope that this presentation is just the beginning of this conversation. I will end by touching upon existing collaborations between architects and occupational therapists, and why I think turning to occupational science may open new possibilities. Occupational therapy is an applied science that draws from many disciplines, including anatomy and physiology, kinesiology, ergonomics, psychology, neurology, anthropology, and sociology. Occupational therapy is grounded in pragmatic philosophy, It is an allied health profession that takes a holistic life course approach. Occupational therapists are experts on health and well-being related to the impact of disease and disability on everyday life activities and social participation. Occupations are categories of activities that people want, need, or are compelled to do every day. Loosely defined, occupation is what people do to occupy themselves in their everyday lives. Occupational therapy applies knowledge of occupation to habilitative and rehabilitative interventions and preventative care promoting health and well-being. Occupational science is an international multidisciplinary science that studies human occupation. According to occupational science, humans are occupational beings, and human occupation, or doing, impacts the identity, health, and well-being of individuals, groups, and populations, such that through occupation, people are able to orchestrate their lives in ways that not only enable them to survive, but also to experience human flourishing. Occupational science develops, tests, and refines occupation-based theories that guide OT practice. Occupational science contributes new knowledge and opens new directions for OT practice. Occupational science has its own national and international professional organizations and journals. Although occupational science has a close relationship with OT, not all occupational scientists practice OT. Anthropologists, economists, psychologists, and researchers from other disciplines are all active in occupational science. Occupational therapy as a profession in the United States, United Kingdom, and Canada arose from an era of dramatic social, economic, and scientific change brought about by industrialization and other circumstances. 4 social movements are recognized as contributing in some way to the parallel formation of the profession internationally. These social movements include the moral treatment movement, the settlement house movement, the arts and crafts movement, and the educational reform movement. Moral treatment called for humane environmental conditions and treatment for people with mental illnesses. Sorry, I'm having a little trouble with my computer here. Recognizing that the mentally ill needed sunlight, clean air, and safe, pleasant surroundings to recover their health, just as the physically ill required. I apologize. Was a major shift in thinking. In the 1800s, those humane environments often took the form of settlement houses. The settlement house movement began in England with the establishment of Toynbee Hall. The idea caught on and spread, first to New York, then to Chicago with the establishment of Hull House. Hull House was established to work with newly arrived immigrants living in crowded tenements and working in factories on Chicago's West Side. The focus of Hull House was on daycare, employment, education, and the arts. The settlement house movement developed champions of the immigrants' cause, advocating for immigrants' rights and for improved public health services. Frank Lloyd Wright was directly involved and influential with the leaders of the settlement house movement in Chicago. By the early 1900s, there were strong social reform movements in place to address the growing social problems, including the widespread physical and mental health disorders brought about by stress, poverty, and poor environmental conditions. Occupational therapy was founded in 1917 during the Progressive Era and World War I. 2 of the 6 founding members of occupational therapy, Thomas Bessel Kidner, and George Edward Barton were architects. Kidner was a recognized expert on manual training for the building trades. He developed a successful program for returning wounded soldiers to work using handicrafts to develop concentration, perseverance, problem solving, eye-hand control, and manual dexterity. Kidner helped to found occupational therapy as a profession, served on the board of the American Occupational Therapy Association, and consulted on the design of hospitals. Barton suffered firsthand experience with several of the major health concerns of the era, tuberculosis and psychosomatic illness. Barton sought treatment at the sanatorium in Clifton Springs, New York. The treatment at Clifton Springs combined psychological and medical services in the form of the work cure. This approach used orderly routine and occupation in the form of selected handicrafts such as woodworking, weaving, and pottery to reestablish physical and psychological health. Barton benefited tremendously from this therapeutic approach. He subsequently trained in nursing and opened his own convalescent center where he could apply his emerging ideas on the therapeutic uses of occupation. Barton is credited with naming the profession occupational therapy. Sorry, Mike. There we go. Come on. Okay, that was too hard. In its early years, occupational therapy practice was a holistic practice that united mind and body through engagement in occupation for the betterment of the whole person. As the biomedical model rose to prominence, the focus on occupation declined. Occupational science allowed OT to overcome the limits of the medical model while not dispensing with it entirely. The medical model continues to play an important role in addressing specific practice concerns. The medical model, when it serves occupational engagement in daily life, can be incorporated under the pragmatic philosophical approach baked into occupation-based theories and models of practice. The rise of occupational science led to a refocusing on the importance of the environment in the practice of occupational therapy. Malcolm Cutchin began the argument that would become the start of a continuing discourse about transactionalism in occupational science. Transactionalism is an attempt to bring OS/OT theory closer to reality by recognizing that the environment is not a container for occupation, nor a stage upon which occupations unfold. The environment actively shapes human occupation. Occupational scientists and therapists are concerned with the body in space, how the body perceives space, moves through space, and interacts with objects and people in space are all concerns related to engagement in occupation and social participation, which are fundamental concepts of occupational therapy. Placemaking, or how space acquires meaning, is a concept that occupational science introduced to occupational therapy. Placemaking refers to how, through repeated encounters, a space begins to hold memories of environmental and social interactions related to occupation. Space becomes places as they acquire human meaning. The opposite is an experience of placelessness, in which the space the body inhabits has no particular significance. I'm sorry, I skipped my notes. We're going to move on. Okay. Really sorry. This is incredibly frustrating. I don't have my dongle to connect my mouse, and I can't. My computer is just not cooperating. Okay, there we go. Person-place relationships are dynamic and perhaps best understood through an occupational lens. In other words, people go to places to do things. Third places are places in the community that support social interaction among people regardless of social status. Coffee shops, libraries, and community centers are formal locations that may act as third places. Informal locations, however, may also act as third places and may be more accessible for low-income or marginalized populations. Third places support occupations such as caring for self and others, engaging in leisure activities, and social participation. Research on third places has been criticized for overlooking the exclusionary practices that sometimes occur. Third places have the potential to increase social cohesion, yet there is little recent investigation into third places and how they may meet or fail to meet social needs. Notably, the concept of third places was introduced to occupational science by urban planners Thompson and Kent, 2014. At that time, Thompson and Kent focused on the ways in which the built urban environment affected engagement in the occupations that are associated with the prevention and management of non-communicable chronic diseases. A built environment that restricts access to healthy food, exercise, safe social interaction, and relaxation fosters unhealthy conditions that may lead to chronic diseases. Metabolic syndrome, which, if uncontrolled, leads to type 2 diabetes, is one example. Chronic conditions remain a serious concern of population health. Communicable diseases have made a resurgence, and mental health conditions have surged. The built environment and patterns of human engagement in occupation are important factors in the complex problem of health and well-being. Architects design first, second, and third places. The functions of first, second, and third places may be incorporated within the single space that architects design at different scales to meet social and occupational needs. Susan Tracy was the author of the first instructive manual of occupational therapy in 1907. In her manual, Tracy linked aesthetic experiences of the natural environment to physiological responses supporting health and well-being. Richard Neutra expressed something similar in his 1953 book, Survival Through Design. However, Neutra linked experience of the built environment to physiological functioning and considered that the material and aesthetic choices of the designer impacted the health and well-being of the building's inhabitants. Both Tracy and Neutra were responding to threats to well-being and human functioning from technological and social change. Tracy instructed practitioners to take their clients' aesthetic sense into consideration when designing an intervention to support their health and functioning. And Neutra urged architects to understand and meet their clients' needs, including aesthetic ones, to support their health and functioning. Aesthetic emotional experiences in everyday life have been associated with an increased sense of well-being. Occupation, inseparable from the environment, is a good source of aesthetic emotions in everyday life. A recurring pattern that I see is that when rapid technological advances disrupt society in highly stressful ways, holistic thinkers respond by reconnecting people with each other and with the world around them through emphasizing embodied experiences of the world. Although my review of the literature on interdisciplinary collaboration between architects and occupational therapists was non-systematic and by no means exhaustive, it appears that the most widely recognized opportunity for collaboration is in accessibility and universal design. Student collaborations between the two disciplines are typically focused on universal design. This is unsurprising. Focusing on UD allows for collaborative roles to be clearly defined while exposing the students to new approaches to problem solving. In this context, OT students have been acknowledged for their ability to understand and advocate for the needs of a disabled client. The images above are the results of a recent student collaboration at a university in Poland. Architectural and OT students created a dwelling that supported the occupations such as bathing, toileting, work, sleep, and relaxation of an individual with muscle atrophy. Universal design makes it a functional space. Aesthetics help to give it a sense of place. The categories of interests listed above I gleaned from attending Arch 24, an architectural design for health conference held in Helsinki, Finland. I went with an open mind, seeking to learn more about possibilities for OT and architectural collaboration. What I found struck me as a tremendous opportunity for synergistic collaboration. It seemed to me that OTs and architects continue to have parallel interests and an overlapping focus on the environment, but have lost the memory of a shared history and philosophy. The interests of architectural design for health align with OT areas of education, practice, and expertise. I don't know exactly what these collaborations should look like, but I believe that occupational science offers the opportunity for architects and OTs to become research partners in exploring the complex relationships between the built and natural environment, human occupation, and health. Knowledge may be generated from this partnership that could then be applied to practice, both architectural and occupational. Thank you for your time and attention, and for hanging in there with me.
Thank you so much, Kyle. This is great. It's so fascinating to me that actually there's so much intersection between architecture and other disciplines, also in its history, right? So I noted down your references. I'm gonna go read the books. And so now I'd like to welcome Christian Pongrat and Alexander Lopez, our last presenters, last but not least. We're going to talk about the collaboration we have between the OT department and architecture, see if we put in practice what Kyle suggests. And yes.
That one?
So we have two sets of slides. So whoever wants to go first.
No, we're just gonna go with his slide.
One.
Yeah. I mean, I can show
Sure.
one element of it.
Does this one work? Yeah. Take this one. This one. Yeah. There we go. So we just give you a brief overview of our ongoing collaboration since about maybe 3 years in our program in the Master of Science in Health and Design, housed in the School of Architecture and Design. And my name is Christian Pongrat. And visual description today in blue, gray hair, aging.
Yes. Like imposter syndrome, so I can't describe myself. I am a middle-aged man with the receding hairline.
And the slides basically share the collaboration between at least 3 faculty. So myself, Professor Alex Lopez, and Professor Atina Papadopoulou.
So I'm going to speak about the neurological processes that happen with everyday activities. And when we talk about inclusion, we use a lot of social models and political models to describe the process of inclusion. Accessibility and inclusion are about getting the person there, but it's really about belonging. And belonging means that the person feels safe and at home, that they feel like they're part of the environment. And with that being said, it's a neurological process. There are centers in the brain within the limbic system or within the entire brain. The brain is plastic, it's malleable, and it's one organ in our body that is able to regenerate, to create new neural pathways within the brain. And with every experience a person has, it's an opportunity for growth. If we don't have inclusion, if we don't have belonging, we don't have growth. So in fact, when people are in environments that do not provide them the safety, the security, and the feeling of belonging, we're holding them back. So when I talk about the neurological processes associated with being in an environment, we're talking about experiences that create neuroplasticity, that create change in the brain and growth in the individual. So with exercise, we use exercise as our model. And occupational therapy, as my colleague had mentioned, occupations are the things that you do that define you, that you find meaningful in your life, that are special to you. And I use sports as one of the occupations. My occupation is as a coach in our facility, and the children that come there are athletes. They're identified as athletes. In fact, I tell their parents their children are not special unless they perform like they're special. I'm a little bit of an old school coach. And we have a facility that's a state-of-the-art facility that is a facility that has been designed by multiple partners, architects, engineers that have been part of this interprofessional process. But the whole idea is that we are training children in ways that address their areas for growth. I wouldn't say weaknesses, their differences. So as athletes, we identify their ability to perform athletic activities based on their social, emotional performance, their cognitive behavioral performance, their sensory motor processing performance. And we see the individual holistically and how that brain can be facilitated to interact with its environment and be successful in that environment. So in our facility, what we see, and just so you know, we have children, about 85% are neurodivergent. They have autism spectrum disorder and maybe ADHD, but we do have children with cerebral palsy, Down syndrome. Some have mental health conditions like oppositional defiant disorder and obsessive compulsive disorder, and a range of different disorders. And what we do there is we identify their brain function difficulties and tailor the interventions in a sports context to meet those particular needs. We have a great deal of success. We're in the process of conducting a number of different scientific inquiries on how our interventions are making a change in the performance of children. We use a range of different applications, anywhere from augmented reality, virtual reality. We have treadmills that we've designed ourselves and that are designed specifically for our children. They're social treadmills, so they're 10 feet long and 6 feet wide, so that two people can run on the treadmill at the same time while playing soccer and virtual reality gaming systems. So it's a really unique opportunity. It's a one-of-a-kind experience. Our environment is designed like a sports training, a high-end sports training facility, so that when the children come there, they assume the role, the identity of being an athlete. And we don't have any characters on the wall. It's not like a Disney place. I don't treat them like I'm a character at Disneyland. I treat them like they're coaches, and they assume that role. They become that role. So through doing, they become in our particular facility. It's a 10,000 square foot facility with great deal of technology. I'll show you a little glimpse of it, but in our collaboration, that just highlights the facility. And when we connected with the School of Architecture, this collaboration really highlights the impact that interprofessional collaborations can do, because within our scope of practice, we are client-centered and client-driven, But what happens is we work within our own bubble and our own silo, and this opportunity with Christian and Athena gives us the opportunity to expand that knowledge. And in fact, since we started our collaboration, we went from 7,000 square feet to an additional 3,000 square feet dedicated to research and development. So.
And you see here also a mix of students. So we try to involve undergraduates and graduates or postgraduates. So students within the Master of Arts in Design, but also fifth-year students in the undergraduate Bachelor of Architecture. And we kind of give them this exposure here in a way to, let's say, visit on a repeat basis, ISF, so inclusive sports and fitness, and really learn there, get exposed to kind of the activities, but also in a way, let's say, observe your clients or your kids in that facility, really. So here you saw briefly a documentation. So this is one of our students last year, and he actually, maybe go one further. So this is Arib, so one of the bachelor students in architecture, and you see that he himself had some kind of mobility issues. So I think it was for us really, in a way, interesting to see that he was included in the class activities. So his classmates really accepted him and actually supported him throughout the year. And he himself then actually as a designer, let's say, engaged in the advanced technology that you have, right? So this VR system that allows for positive distraction, but also for training for the kids, right? And so Julian, another student in the class, was also excited about this, let's say, your favorite activity, so the VR activity. And so Athena mentioned before also that there's a really challenge because the kids really go there only once a week, about twice a week, about an hour maybe each.
An hour each.
And so since we collaborate, we were discussing, so how can we expand or extend the possibility of training for them, right? And so came a discussion with our student, and we came about, so could we actually offer them a virtual extension of training, then once they're at home with their parents or the siblings, and they can actually continue this kind of activity in a new way. And here you see the journey mapping that the student proposes in this kind of VR environment. So basically it's the same like you have that we show here. So this kind of assessment, okay? So the initial assessment that shows about the activities should be fine motor precision, integration, manual dexterity, and versus different types of limb coordination. And so he introduced it also into the VR game.
Yes, and what's unique about that is that, like I said, every activity we do, particularly every new activity, is a brain activity. So we're creating new neural pathways, new connections in the brain, but they're fragile. And the ability to create a VR game that mimics the things that you're doing in the home environment will create stronger neural pathways that go from learning a new function to becoming a structural change within the brain that can be actually moved on to a transferable skill set. So they acquire a skill set, they learn a new skill set, they acquire it, they develop a program in their brain for that skill set, and then they can transfer it to other things. So when you experience new activities and new opportunities in whatever environment you're in, you're providing very you're creating like they're dendritic sprouting, things that are sprouting within the brain that's happening. They're weak, but they're enough. An environment can change that by creating a new environment that facilitates ongoing, continued exposure. You're creating changes, actual changes within the brain, the structure, the actual structure of the brain. So this video game system reinforces that and hopefully moves on to a new skill set and a new level of functioning for the child.
And so in the game also, so the student thought about different types, let's say, of activities, yeah, or engagements. And he went about what you see on the left side, so there's kind of 4 horizontal levels. And those in the game basically calibrate in the journey mapping how to assess it. So there's, on the one hand, different environments created, each one with a specific activity or action. But also then he was thinking about, so what is then the actual emotional arousal in that specific game? So we go from high activity to low activity. And also how can that be complemented by acoustics? Yeah? So kind of stimulating different senses as much as you can in a VR environment, and kind of to emulate the maybe of course much more advanced experience I might have in real life, right, in the activity. And then you come in sometimes in our class, and you basically help our students so kind of step into the shoes of.
Yeah, I mean, we try to create a sense of empathy. It's not. It's just a practice of understanding what an individual might be going through, with who might have low vision or who might have proprioception issues with sensory processing. It is an exploration of as to what people endure. Of course, we know that we're only going through a simulation. It's not the actual, but it helps understand them. They learned more about the conditions, what to expect. Our children actually do all of our program with a mentor. So another typically developing child is trained with that child so that they can model the behavior we want to see in them. And we provide mentor one-on-one training for those children so that they can understand what the behaviors they might be manifesting. So this is just an exercise.
Then let's say there's also activities that we have pursued over the last year or so. So here we see some, I would call them maybe mapping exercises. So from a designer or architectural point of view, we kind of assess the space. So it's kind of creating this kind of environmental scenarios. So we kind of think about how do we audit actually your facility or ISF, how does it perform? So we looked at Mustafa's aspects guidelines, which are the only ones that are out there right now that really help you understanding better how to be guided in designing architectural spaces. So the students used their guidelines. Also, we did some sensory testing. So it means students went in actually with sensors in terms of understanding maybe skin conductance, emotional arousal, etc., and tried to get a better, and of course lighting, for example, sensory zoning, how to acoustics. The difficulty, of course, is that in your facility also, sometimes those buildings, they are not really designed for that activity, for that usage, right? So basically we're adapting architecture to perform, in this case, as a facility for autistic kids. Yeah, and of course, with all the typical shortfalls we have in typical industrial construction buildings. Yeah. And so basically in the second thought, you go back in and reanalyze it, audit it, and see where can designer actually improve or the kind of the building.
I was so proud of how I designed my facility myself without any architectural background. And then they did their evaluation, and I realized that I should not pretend to be an architect or designer. It was disappointing when I heard about particularly the acoustics.
And then we kind of with that experience that we had together last year, I think we had a few. We asked our students to just come up with ideas for the new expansion, using the new bay in this kind of industrial facility. And the students came up with a few ideas of what can be done in that space, how do we zone the space for different levels of kids on the spectrum, and then also how do we furnish it, materials, colors, etc. Was kind of part, I think, of the exercise. Also, what I think is where our students start to benefit from is the exposure they have at ISF, actually with the actual users, so the kids. And our students engaged here in different types of mapping processes, so kind of going through a persona development, so really learning about, by observation, what's the difference actually between kids on the spectrum, and then also define that in a graphical way. So what are the kind of various emotional, let's say, times they go through in their kind of activities. Yeah. So it's kind of a part of the tools that and skills that our students learn in the program. And then we have an ongoing recent project.
Yeah, so we, as you know, I'm also an attorney, and so I was an OT. I became an attorney so that I could advocate for people with disabilities. I was with the Massachusetts Office of Disabilities at one point, but then I moved to Long Island because my wife told me to. And So now that I'm on Long Island, I had to rediscover myself, but I am very politically oriented, very law oriented. So I've connected with many of the local politicians on both sides of the aisle to ensure that we could make a difference within our own community. And so one project that came up was in collaboration with the School of Architecture was designing an inclusive park, but not necessarily just an inclusive park. We're reaching for an inclusive theme park, where it would be a place of doing for all individuals. The town that we're working with has acquired some land and several $1 million to help facilitate the process, but we're in the infancy stages of the process where they have to do abatement and all sorts of things with the land. But we had a meeting with politicians at the state level, actually at the federal level, state level, as well as the county and town level. With the students, and the students presented their ideas and their thoughts on how to create this park, and the politicians were just blown away, and they were reaching deep into their pockets to actually make this happen. So it's an ongoing project at this point.
You see a few early sets of diagrams. So we have our recent graduate, Nida Momeni here, I would say, in the audience. And she was kind of giving it let's say, the initial step forward in terms of understanding. So what are potential programmatic elements we should include? Should we set up some functional rules? How do we generate a design process that would be maybe as open as possible to allow maybe for other stakeholders to actually participate and really in a kind of a co-design driven process. Right now we have a new student in the program, Graziela, and she will continue over the next year on the project to add more information and really prepare the ground, I think. So here we see maybe a first site plan where a lot of the initial program ideas are implemented, including maybe also a generative design strategy of where different programmatic elements need to be placed on that site. Yeah. And here's maybe some early images, just giving an idea also maybe to the different stakeholders, what is possible, what are maybe really important activities, also maybe the difference, of course, to play to the sensorial response of the different users. If you want to do a park that is really inclusive or designed for all, then you have to be very wide ranged actually in the activities, and also in terms of materials, the type of spaces, and also you have to consider day and night. Yeah? So there's a whole range maybe of activities need to be considered.
Many of our previous speakers have talked about the idea of creating having accessibility to all or inclusion for all. I mean, ultimately it's a utopian kind of concept of actually providing that. But I'd like to go back to like the brain and how the brain is plastic and how malleable it is. Everyone has potential for growth within their brain, and providing environments that actually facilitate growth in the brain is going to help facilitate active participation in some capacity. So we got to be pragmatic. I think I mentioned last time we talked, I said that it's not about making the perfect world, but being an altruistic architect or designer, and that always striving to create environments that help facilitate that.
And here maybe a few images also. So the students in our program not only observe actually kids in this kind of training environment, but they also by themselves try to experience all the equipment. So we see different students here in the kind of the customized that you have.
These are the architect students.
Yeah, architecture students experiencing the equipment.
I have some other slides to show you the larger part of the facility.
And then in those discussions actually then, so this is here a project from an undergraduate student graduating in 23. So she kind of was interested in helping kids in the kind of study efforts through this kind of stimming stool. And she kind of went through a series of, I would say, alterations, variations in terms of materiality, in terms of mobility on the chair. And here we see kind of some images of the early prototype and the kind of the testing of different users in your facility and also us maybe as faculty. And then we have a project also ongoing right now in a collaboration with Kids' Choice here in New York. And this is from a recent graduate, so Firdaus Khatun, graduated in May. And she's developing here. So we'll be moving down from urban design, architectural design, product design, now to device design. So you see a kind of wide range of products we do in the program. In terms of device design here, we talk about a wearable device that has haptic feedback and allows kids on the spectrum to be monitored, so tracking, orientation, and communication to parents or maybe the supervisors. And in the collaboration, we were made aware about the fact that autistic children were drowning recently. So he was really interested in finding a new way of being more in connection with all the kind of the clients. And so this is kind of a wearable device. Here we see an early prototype from a classmate wearing it. And so it has embedded technology inside. So the idea is also that actually it looks like a toy. Yeah. And so the technology is really kind of non-visible. Yeah. So also maybe for the fact maybe that a lot of children become abducted. So kind of how do we have a device that does actually all those things, but it's not really understandable what it really does. Yeah. And on our case, please visit us on Instagram, NYT Design Health. Thank you. Now we have a few slides also.
We want to see the video by yourself, this nice video you have.
So I'll just share with you some of the technology. We have about 5 different studies going on concurrently. We use motionless motion capture to analyze the movement, to address their movement difficulties. And we're using immersive virtual reality to correct those by creating programs that identify their head position relative to their body and their eye levels, and we can actually track their visual attention skills, cicadas, and their overall movement. So this is a current study that's going on right now. Here's another study looking at the use of immersive virtual reality in energetics. Many of our kids get into into a flow of sorts that they lose track of time and energy expenditure. And so when they're on the treadmill playing our video games, they actually don't actually realize how much energy they're expending. Without the VR sets, they get tired really quickly. With the VR sets, they're actually pushing themselves more and more and going beyond their actual capacity. So we're using energetics testing to identify their performance there. And that doing it on the treadmill as well. And one other study that we're conducting right now is the use. We just received a grant from the National Science Foundation to look at how wearable technology can help improve movement performance among children with motor impairments, fine motor impairments. So that's another study that we're conducting. So we're doing a lot of research. This is our facility, a quick 60-second or 50-second video of our facility. We use a lot of exergaming to engage the children. I hate that part. That's it. Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
I love this video so much. I think you should come here and do some videos for our projects as well. And this is a great collaboration we've been having, and
Thank
we're
you.
very excited for next projects to come. And with that, please sit here on the panel, and I'd like to invite my colleague Florencia Vecher for the moderation, and then I'll cross the panel as well. So Florencia is the chair of the Interior Design Program at NYT. She holds a Master of Architecture from Princeton University, where she studied under Kazuyo Suzima at her architecture firm Sana. Jesse Racer and Umemoto and Elizabeth Diller of Scofidio. Vetcher earned her Diploma of Architecture from the Universidad de Belgrano in Buenos Aires and studies at the prestigious ETCAB, Escola Técnica Superior de Arquitectura de Barcelona, as a visiting scholar. She has taught at the Architectural Association in London, the Pratt, the Parsons School of Design, the School of Visual Arts, and Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute. In addition to teaching, Vetcher runs the architecture and interior design practice Vetcher Braidford with partner Cygnus Braidford. I don't know how to pronounce, I'm sorry. Working on small-scale projects in the United States, Argentina, and Iceland.
Thank you, Athena. Thank you, everybody, for this amazing day of presentations. I think it's been very, very enlightening. And I just want to say thank you for putting me in this last group of health and design, because I have a personal anecdote. I am a daughter of two doctors, one pediatrician and one heart doctor. And I grew up basically in hospitals or waiting for them in different environments that were medical, either the private office or the hospitals where they were working. And I was always interested in this relationship between the health, the doctors, the occupational therapists, the nurses, everybody that works in the health field has certain empathy that have taught to see different ways how we could design. No? So I think I find a certain connection between our interests, and I feel like very honored to be here. So thank you. And I'm just gonna give you maybe the ground to say, maybe each of you at the end of the day, what would you say to these new generations of students that are young and question the traditional and want to do more for society, particularly also after COVID, no? And we saw there a great growth of medical, and actually in Argentina, they were saying how many, the numbers have grown incredibly in young students wanting to become part of the health force, like an 80% higher than before. So I just wonder about like, what do we have in common that we want to improve society or spaces and the way of living of people. So if you can just like give the students one advice to what to observe, what to account for, what to always have in mind. Is that too deep?
I can say, I share with you, I think my participation in this journey with children with disabilities has changed my life. It's shaped my life. If you have an opportunity to work with people who have been marginalized, have been deprived of opportunities to be part of your community and make a difference and actually see the growth that evolves from that, it's meaningful to you. It changes your life. It's made me a better father, a better husband, a better friend to people. If you're looking for quality of life, if you're looking for substance, working in this population will shape your life in ways that you'll never know paycheck could ever compensate for. However, let me just say that you have to make your money. You have to be successful in life to contribute to society. But it really has shaped my life and changed my life. So if you have an opportunity, I would do it.
Anyway, we also have, we should have Grace in the discussion. Grace, can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
Okay. Grace is here too. I'll try to put her on the screen. Please go ahead.
Dr. Karen, do you have an advice?
I do. So I agree with my colleague that this is a really meaningful endeavor. But I also think that working collaboratively and with people from other professions is incredibly important, but it can be really, really difficult to do. I've done a lot of, I have kind of this checkered past, starting with a career in art and then somehow becoming, having this career in health. And I've collaborated with healthcare economists and done various things, but it's really difficult because when you work with people from different disciplines, everyone has their own language, right? Their own jargon, their own way of thinking about things, and so you are often it's frustrating because you don't speak the same language, and you can be sort of like the child in the room, because you're talking to people who are fluent and talk to each other kind of in shorthand all the time, whereas you're kind of catching up but trying to communicate this other knowledge, but it can feel very uncomfortable. But I think if you can kind of work through that, it's really rewarding for both on all sides.
Yeah, I would maybe try to be a bit critical with our profession in a way. I mean, it came up a few times today, and I think what we share maybe in a way is that with a kind of hypothesis saying that the built environment is actually what makes people less abled. Yeah. So that if that's our starting point, and we have to say, okay, so what did we do the last, particularly the last maybe 50, 60 years in architecture and interior design and or product design and service design, right? What did we do wrong? That we have an environment that is actually not really equal for everyone, right? Not facilitating, right? So then we have to look at our own education in design and say, what did we change? Did we change anything? And I came late to this whole process in a way. And have been educated differently. Nobody in my education talked about any question of disability, etc. It's not a topic, right? So we are so busy when we teach design on aesthetics, yeah, on the looks, on the beautification, yeah, and then of course there's other things, there's a technology, etc. But I mean, I think that the question of designing for people from day one is not really on our books yet. So I think we as designers have a lot to do to really rethink the curricula that we have and the education that we're giving to the generation of today, because they are the ones who will have to struggle more and on making this change, right? So it's like the program that I talked about is a Master of Science. So it's a postgraduate program. So we have designers, professionals, and students coming actually from all disciplines, almost. So engineers, bioengineers, the medical fields. We welcome everybody. Yeah. And we would use the process of design thinking to put them on a common platform to exchange creative ideas. But it's late in the game. It still makes a contribution, but the impact will be much bigger if we could start on day one in the design fields, right? To say, because on the other hand, is also everything we give them is a brief, it's a project, you do it for a semester, you put it on the wall, you get reviewed, and it gets discarded, right? So that's our process, how we go about. Yeah. When can we start to actually on day one, not say it's not about building or making something, it's about looking at the existing environment and what can we actually do there to make it actually a better lived experience for everyone. And I think that should be one of our next steps with students starting really early on and implement it. It's a change of mindset, right?
May I respond?
Yeah, totally.
So I just wanted to comment that so my area of research interest is everyday aesthetics and how that affects people's engagement in occupation. So it's a different view on how you think about aesthetics when you're designing, because now what the concern is the the aesthetics of the people using the space, and what are they using the space for, and you know, aesthetic responses are these things that we will go through our daily lives, having aesthetic emotions, responding to objects, environment, people, and we do this automatically, and then it kind of enters our consciousness when we have this realization that we are liking or disliking something. But aesthetics that, when they correspond to human need in everyday life, are actually associated with health and well-being. So there's a difference between imposing an aesthetic vision with, like if we're talking about architecture with the capital A, or if we're talking about everyday life experiences and the capacity for humans to be aesthetic beings, which we have, but it's a different way of looking at it. Did that make sense? Aesthetics are still important.
I'd like to include Grace in the
Okay.
discussion and maybe build on related, but I kind of admire what you've done with the Open Style Lab, and I remember the beginnings of it, and I'm thinking like what does it take to kind of, because many of us, we talk about inclusive design we do in our studio or in our research projects, but you wanted to take that out from the university and kind of research and teaching to the community and make a successful nonprofit. So what does it take to do that? What are the challenges, and how do you see that providing back to the university and to kind of learning?
Yeah, I mean, I think first it takes lots of coffee, sleepless nights, of course, sacrificing your well-being. But all jokes aside, I know I'm hovering over everybody, so it's hard to integrate me in the conversation. So I appreciate it. But I think this question is geared to students, and if anything, I could tell students or young entrepreneurs, it's really to kind of get out of your comfort zone, make the mistakes early. I've made plenty of mistakes of trying to guess what maybe people with disabilities want, to assume maybe what an occupational therapist does. And I think by learning to listen and to meet people outside of your discipline more and more is probably the biggest benefit you can give to yourself as a student. So I think that's kind of really been critical for me to have the ambition to take something outside of academia. One of the biggest reasons was because I knew while there were wonderful resources in education, the community and the people that I wanted to work with was always going to be somewhere outside as well. So filing as a nonprofit just seemed like the right step at that time. And it's not for everybody. I think it was kind of a time where everything looked glamorous and doing a startup, and there's like B-Tech funding and all of those things, and everybody wants to be their own brand today, but it's really hard work. And it's a lot of, I think, close listening to make sure all those voices are heard, but also filtered in a way that you're kind of representing, whether it's a project, a product, or a collaboration as a whole that finalizes to something, or an outcome that is still in process. So I think that just takes, kind of just listening to people and being outside of your comfort zone all the time, constantly.
Alex, what do you think about that? You also have a nonprofit.
Well, I started my nonprofit 12 years ago. It was supposed to be just a project, on a summer project, and it evolved over time. It's a little different for me. I've never drawn a salary from it. I'm a volunteer of the organization, but it's what I love to do. And as you said about community, we have hundreds of people that are involved in our programming and what we do. So it really has brought me closer to my community, but also it's made me, like, it's something I'm passionate about and I love to do. So it's hard for like when I talk about, when I talk about doing what, working with this population, it really as it shapes your life. The evolution of my organization whether we move on to franchising it and growing even more, is just something that I find, you know, it's both impactful and meaningful to me. So I encourage everyone. The one thing about working, so we have neuroscientists at our facility, we have engineers, we have architects now, we have a range of people that are doing research. The one thing I would say, with whether you're working with those individuals or the user itself, is that humility is so important. How much you have to offer, you may think you have more to offer than you think you do, and then you meet somebody like Athena and Christian, and you realize that there's more to be offered. And so keeping a humble mind, understanding that the user knows more about what they need than you do, and being immersed in the community. There's nothing better than that, you know. So I moved here from, I'm from Newark, New Jersey. I grew up in the projects, went to Boston to go to school, graduate school, and then we went to Long Island. I did not like living on Long Island. It's not, it wasn't my first choice. My wife was my first choice, but Long Island was. And when I did this, I discovered how wonderful the people are around me, and I didn't give them a chance when I first started. So being immersed in the community and being involved in community-based practice is really just a wonderful thing to do.
Great comments. Thank you very much. I just want to say that for the students, no, the idea of engaging, I'm just going to repeat what it's been saying, no, but engaging in with the community, having an open mind, having learn how to listen, and then also have that, you know, break that barrier that you were saying, like, oh, I'm here with neuroscientists and I feel intimidated. Of course, what am I going to say that it's more or contribute to that practice, no? Or to, but we are all working together on a project that is, you know, for everybody. So the collaboration should be something that, as you say, should be taught from the beginning, because yes, we still do design individually, you know, we have independent projects, and the students have hard time sometimes collaborating with themselves, you know, like two architects talking or two interior design talker. And so that's the beginning of it. Like you start collaborating with the same field, no, like people that speaks the same language, but then you have to start including others to do a very thorough job, like all of the presenters today that are highly engaged. One comment back to the aesthetic and also to the name of Grace nonprofit, which is open
Style Lab, yes.
style. Why style? I mean, I just wanted to say we are like talking about style and again aesthetic, and you know how all the things integrate to what we do. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about the name.
Oh, yes. I mean, it is what it is. It's about open style. And it was a lab at MIT, like literally as a public service project. And I think maybe the deeper question that I think you're asking is about maybe the design appearance or aesthetics. And in fashion, like style is such an extension of one's personality and character. And in design aesthetics, I think it's just the same. It really is important to kind of give that personalization to someone. While there's a lot of, I think, friction that I see from something being mass produced or designed for everyone as universal design versus the eternal conundrum of, but it's not made for me. It's not customized enough. It doesn't speak to my personality. But that's where I think the notion of style, especially in fashion context, has really great opportunity to teach students, to teach myself and many other scholars on the way we look at clothing as like a signifier. It also looks at status. It looks at ability if you're a performer or you're an athlete. And so all of those like social connotations are embedded in the things we wear. Right now I'm wearing like all things sustainable because I had a huge discussion on like climate change like about a few hours ago, but anyway.
Okay, great.
And so like just being, I think, thinking about beyond fast fashion, beyond just clothing to just cover you, those are functional needs based, but the actual aesthetic comes to play. For example, I knew a friend who said, Grace, I really need trousers that are dark because sometimes I could have accidents that happen like in the middle of a concert. And he was a wheelchair user, but also a performer. And in the middle of that concert, it's pretty hard to like go out for even myself and for others to find the restroom. It would take like 15 minutes through the crowd. And so if those kind of factors really kind of determine what colors, what materials you choose, they are beyond, I think, just appearances, but they are innately functional in their way. And there's a beautiful relationship that I think plays that I've seen in style and fashion. And it makes me think, I'm looking at everyone who's wearing things in this room, and I love touching fabrics. I love kind of hearing about people's stories about where they get certain garments from, why it means something to them. And I think that helps bring a bigger relationship and context. And so the video actually that I wanted to show shows my best friend who has a disability getting married, and me making a little part of her wedding a bit special by thinking of the bouquet to be part of her garment. And so I hope you guys check out the video, but that I think is a good example of style and aesthetics still being integral to our practice.
Great, thank you, Grace. Actually, I wanted to say that in your presentation, in one of the points, you mentioned something that you do, and I wrote it down because I thought it was important. It was a point that you mentioned is translation of my observations into design. So I think that's some important point for the students as well. No, it's like how you observe and translate that into a possible design, whatever design you're doing. No, but like I think observation, and that's another connection to scientists and occupational therapy that has to do a lot of observing and being there and really connecting. So great. Thank you.
One more comment on Grace's work. I'm glad that she was participating today, because at least one of us was kind of touching a bit on the material paradigm. We didn't go really deep on that, in fact, because if we actually discuss about the built environment impacting human health and biodiversity, a large portion of that is actually materials. Yeah, so the whole material paradigm that we actually also teach in design, is something that we really need to think about from day one, because a lot of these decisions we make there are impacting humans, and there's a certain group of humans, and there's certain larger areas of impact first. Yeah, so the most vulnerable will be the first ones that actually suffer among wrong decisions in the environment. And we teach also, for example, in our program about the originating sources of disease, chronic disease, etc. And I think that is maybe for the future also, I think, as we look more and more into, I guess, retrofit in the future, so not so much new build, but retrofit existing structures. Yeah, a lot of will need to be discussed and analyzed and audited in terms of what is in the existing environment, in terms of materials, in terms of the spatial design, etc., because that's what will impact future generations. So we have a bulk on our shoulders that we still need to kind of work through. Yeah. And I think there's a lot of work out there for our students. Yeah.
Great. Yes. Any questions from you, students here in the audience?
We really want to hear from students, not only students, but we haven't heard from any students. All right, Omar.
Yes.
Omar stayed for the whole conference, so you get extra credit, extra credit.
I hope I get. So actually, I just want to ask, this came up before, and I just thought you just mentioned the language and actually listening to people and knowing what's behind the lines. So actually, like my question came out to Catherine, Jennifer, sorry, I'm not sure she is here yet, still. But my question was like, okay, yeah, I'm glad you're here. So my question is like, how do you actually, like you mentioned before, you surveys with children and students, how do you actually know what they mean when they actually draw something and you actually translate that into architecture? So just for an example, the child that drew this long slide, maybe he was like just saying that their slide is short, right? So it's just that decoding and understanding what people actually mean when they actually say something is really hard. So that's what I'm really curious about.
Give a mic to Jenny.
Yeah. Thanks for asking the question. So in that particular case, in talking more to the teachers, that was an example where we sent surveys to the teachers in a school. Teachers worked with the kids on a exercise and they sent us the information back. So we didn't have direct contact with that child in this case. I mentioned we had different ways of interacting, so we made sure we got like a really wide range of input. But what we took from that one was that they were bored. There was like boring stuff on their playground and they wanted adventure and thrill. And if you look at some of the research that some playground manufacturing companies have done, who are very invested in this because this is how they make profit, and who are realizing there is more of a call for more inclusive play space. The research they've done, and you have to take it with a grain of salt because they are, they're profiting directly from it, is that this desire for thrill is cutting across neurotypes. And so they're looking into ways like, how do you meet the incredibly strict requirements of safety on a playground and still have this like thrilling play as well? So the 200-foot, ladder and the 400-foot slide, that's probably not the solution, but opportunities to like fall and like screw up and like safely push your boundaries is really, really important. Like taking some risk is how you learn and grow. And that's not just for, kind of neurotypical or for able-bodied kids. It should cut across all kids.
Else? Or anyone else wants to respond to Omar's question? Want to respond? Anyone else has a question? From for this panel or for the previous panels? Yeah, anyone online?
Thank you.
Oh, yeah. Yes.
Great.
Yeah.
Hi, my question is for this panel. Do you guys think about like expanding your gym? Because the concept is a great concept and I haven't heard of it before and I didn't know about it. And I'm pretty sure that not only that community is interested in that, there's more like here in New York or in Jersey. So do you guys think you're gonna expand?
So we had people come as far as Brooklyn to our facility twice a week. We have a waiting list of about 85 children. It's unfortunate. It's something that we've been trying to struggle with. We have equipment that's, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars because we've manufactured it ourselves. And so it's hard to replicate what we're doing because we also charge a nominal fee. We charge $25 a visit for occupational therapy for the evaluation process and intervention process for twice a week. And it's hard to, we've been doing that for 12 years. We haven't charged any more than that. We don't use a billing system, so we don't take insurance. So it's hard. If we were to take insurance, we'd have to increase the cost because we'd have to charge everyone the same. And so that's one thing that we struggle with because expansion has to include more funding and money from somewhere. And, we've tried to keep it manageable, but we have people come every day to our facility that have their children evaluated and then put on a waiting list. So it's really unfortunate. It's something that we struggle with.
Oh, we have a student.
Thank you for the great lecture. I wanted to ask about, so we talked about making spaces more ADA accessible, and then we talked about also transdisciplinary communication and how that should also be more accessible in a way, right? And I was wondering, I mean, architecture itself, it communicates something, right? And right now I feel like this communication is like, it's about beauty and wealth most of the time, right? We see that being communicated. So how can we actually communicate these optimistic values to, better society and make everything more inclusive? That's my first question. And then the second comment is that was rather a question. So as students, what we see, right, is what we learn, right? And all our experiences, they also then shape the output, right? The visionary output of what we produce. So in our education, how can we increase this exposure to these different problems, right? To then also tackle the solution in a better way.
Anyone?
I can say, you have to go beyond the boundaries of your practice, beyond your comfort zone, as was mentioned earlier in the discussion today. I think you don't have to compromise your art, the aesthetics of anything if you are resourceful. And I think it's a matter of networking with community leaders, with a range of individuals from major benefactors and organizations. I wouldn't be able to run my organizations without I write grants every year and get hundreds of thousands of dollars in grants to fund the equipment and the things that we do. And so it's not something I'm not very good at asking for anything. I'm very shy. I'm like, I'm hurting right now. But I have team members, I have board members that are willing to get out there and put themselves out there to get the funding and the support necessary. So I think if you want to strive for more, you have to network and build. You have to do capacity building and networking to get there. Anyone can do it. If I can do it, I mean, anyone can do it. So, I mean, I'm doing it at a much smaller scale. It's not like a large grand scale, but you have right now you have the training and the resources, the initial resources, but it's really about your drive, your inner drive and motivation that will create change. And, little Puerto Rican kid from Newark, New Jersey can build a little thing. Anybody could do anything. So.
Happy to chime in here really quickly.
Yes, Grace. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I think just touching off on that, there is a limit to passion without, like we just echoed, having the right resources. And all the students here are unique with their own skill set. So finding, I think, the right group of people to work with you is really key. You can't do everything by yourself. I'm trying to struggle with that as being a new mom, and it's impossible even to be on this panel right now without help. So I really feel like you have to find the right people. For example, if you really want your community to be, representative, and my organization, as part of the board, I made sure as I transitioned out about 5 years ago to have a majority of the company be at least 50% or over disabled. And so disabled people are part of my leadership. They are part of our working employment. And so I think it's really about how do you want to be reflected and who do you want to work with and who has those skill sets. Passion, I think, could get you into the door, but I think it will burn you out if you don't have the right people. And I think the classmates here may be your best chances to teamwork and collaborate. On your first question, I don't know if the word was wealth. I think I heard that maybe wrong or right, but if you can correct me if that was wealth.
That's why he said well.
Yeah. It's so weird. I got this question kind of like similarly at Georgia Tech like a month ago before when I was super, super pregnant. But it's interesting because I think my answer to that, and even still now, is you could really look at like luxury fashion as a great example. You see it trickle down to also more consumers, more people, and there are limitations, there are constraints, but there's still a demand for it because there's a diverse range of people who could either afford it or not afford it, or willing to do so. And so finding those desires and that range, I think would be really interesting to explore similarly in architecture, instead of just saying, there's like a wealth aesthetic and that's kind of how it is, but really kind of dissecting that and seeing how that cycles throughout like the entire practice. But yes, I think that's what the question was. I was trying to remember.
All right, so we'd like to thank our moderator, and I would like to thank our speakers for this session and the previous sessions for these like wonderful discussions. It's really been very productive, and I hope everyone enjoyed it. I did. And thank you so much for staying with us.
Thank
Thank
you.
Bye, Athena.